I realized like I didn't have to try to change who I was to build my business. Now, may it take a little bit longer? Sure. But I think that's just part of my journey and part of my growth as a coach. And I actually think that helps me connect to my players more because, I've been through the struggles, right? I've been doubted, not just as a player, but now as a coach as well. And so being able to still show up every day, still remain disciplined in the things that I do, being confident in who I am and what I bring to the table, I think those skills are very relatable for players and things that I think that I have some experience with that I can help my players with, as well as other coaches, that I work with too.
You are listening to the Beyond the Scoreboard Podcast, transforming athletes into leaders on and off the court with host Coach Furtado. Coaches, are you ready to take your passion for coaching and turn it into a full-time career? I know the challenges firsthand, but the Make Money Coaching Sports program helped me take BTG basketball full-time. If you're tired of juggling coaching part-time and want to fully focus on doing what you love, this business accelerator will give you the tools and support to make it happen. Hit the link in the show notes below to learn more and start living your dream. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Beyond the Scoreboard podcast. Today, we are truly honored to have a true legend in the game of basketball joining us. She is a player development coach who's helped thousands of athletes elevate their game through her company, Reps to Results Basketball, with experience coaching at every level from high school head coach to a coaching associate with the Los Angeles Lakers and currently shaping the next generation at Core Prep Academy. She holds a master's in education from Pepperdine and is even pursuing a certification as a mental performance coach. A former collegiate point guard who led her team to the NCAA tournament, she truly understands the game from every angle. Get ready to dive in with the great mind of Coach Shawn Kolani. Shawn, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. That you killed the intro. Made me feel real good.
There we go. You should. I'm not sure how you have time to do it all, but obviously a very impressive background and really excited to get into our conversation. Really grateful for our conversations we've been having in the last couple of months and the opportunities to just connect and talk about basketball and, more importantly, just developing young people. So before I talk about your experience now and sharing your wisdom, I want to go back to when you were a player and what kind of impact did the game of basketball have on you?
As a player or off court?
As a player and off court when you were an athlete before you were a coach.
Yeah, so I would always describe myself as a pass first point guard. I'm pretty small. I'm about 5'5", so I didn't play much else other than the point guard, but I was a pretty good shooter, so I also played some shooting guard as well. I think, basketball has taught me so much on and off the court. I think my experiences on the court, and just being a part of a team have helped me in a lot of ways, communicate with others, work towards an ultimate goal, to be able to understand roles, to be, a leader within my own role and for the team. I think all of those skills are sort of a paradox for what we experience in life, right? I run my own business now. Being a coach, in a number of ways, you're leading a group of people, whether that's your coaching staff or whether that's the kids that you're working with. So I think everything kind of ties in. But, my experiences as a player are super invaluable to who I am now and what I do even.
Right. I mean, the game of basketball or any sport for that matter prepares you for life beyond the game and, when the ball stops bouncing. And you talked about leadership, you talked about, carving a role on a team and really kind of figuring out your own identity and how you can make an impact on really your team, right? And for you, as you transitioned from being a collegiate athlete, what made you want to make an impact on youth and athletes, college athletes, and even professional athletes?
Excuse me. What's really crazy is I didn't initially think that I was going to be a coach. coming out of college. So I got my undergrad in exercise science, and I was actually taking a gap year between my bachelor's degree, and then I had planned to go to physical therapy school. I was going to be a doctor of physical therapy, and I was getting my clinical hours. And in the meantime, I had somebody approach me that wanted me to coach a middle school team as well as be an assistant on their high school team. And, I had both of those experiences going on at one time. And I really just had an open and honest conversation with myself about what do I really like? What do I really see myself doing? Like, what's going to wake me up every morning? And, when it came down to it, physical therapy wasn't that realm. And so once I kind of discovered that, I then had to essentially take steps to figuring out what I wanted to do outside of that. And the biggest thing was, did I want to coach with a team? Did I want to do player development? And this was back in I want to say 2018 or 2017. And so, player development still wasn't like really that big of an industry at that point. And so, I called up some people and, people that are in the industry already and sort of asked for their advice and asked, what they thought that I should do. How could I, get into this game? And that kind of led me to Pepperdine. So I had a number of my friends that played at Pepperdine for the women's team. And so they had recommended that I reach out to the coach and try to become a graduate assistant. And so I actually got the job, was enrolled in the school, and then a couple weeks before school started, that coach got fired. And so the new coach that they brought in actually wasn't interested in having a graduate assistant at the time. I think, she was just trying to get the program going. And, I totally understood that. But for me, I needed to obviously find another opportunity. And so, again, I kept reaching out to connects and, came across an opportunity to start as an intern. My title was coaching associate with the Los Angeles Lakers. And so that's kind of how I got my foot into the door. And, you know, through that, it's been a journey of figuring out exactly how I want to continue to impact this game. I think even to this day, I'm still figuring that out. Do I want to be more on the coaching side? Do I want to do more player development? And I think, to be good at either, I do think that having skills in both aspects have been really helpful to my growth and development, as well as, the byproduct of that being the athletes that I work with too.
100%. So it sounds like, obviously you sought out mentors, different advice. And can you talk about what that transition period was like when the experience of, oh, I was going to be a grad assistant at Pepperdine, and then the rug gets pulled out from under you? I'm sure at that time you felt like, is this, what I should continue pursuing? Or maybe you put your boots in the ground and you're like, it force you to have a ton of grit, because I'm sure there are some younger coaches, younger trainers that are listening to this episode and they're curious about how they can get started.
Yeah, I think, I was 23 at the time that I got my first job coaching with the Lakers. And like I said, I did coach before that with a middle school team, and I was assistant at a high school. But I think the biggest thing that, like, looking back now, this is 7, 8 years ago, I would have essentially told myself, like, be prepared. Because those moments of failure, those moments of not even failure, like redirection, I think are a part of the coaching journey itself. The coaching world to me is so up and down, right? A lot of coaches don't stay in a lot of places for a long time. Everybody's looking to elevate. It's very competitive. It's all about who you know, right? That's what we hear all the time. And so I think the biggest thing for me is, going into this industry, I wish I was more prepared for that. I wish I was more prepared for the moments of redirection. And I think over time that's helped me build confidence in my abilities to figure things out, right? And be adaptable to what your situation looks like, because it doesn't always pan out in the way that we envisioned or hoped for. But I think the biggest thing is, or biggest advice that I would give to somebody that's also pursuing a coaching career and is kind of just starting, there'd be a couple things. I think one would be adaptable, be flexible, um, and like have the ability to figure things out. Like figuring things out is a skill, and I think is huge in any sort of realm that we're in. And then the other thing would be like network, who you know, especially in this industry. Like I can't emphasize this enough. Every position that I've ever obtained is through somebody that I knew. And so I think a lot of times, we see a job online and, we apply for that job, but a lot of times that's a formality, right? Companies have to do that. A lot of times those jobs are already filled. And so having somebody that you know that can vouch for you, that can speak on your behalf, I think is huge. Um, and I think those would be the two main things that I would say. But uh, also too, just being true to yourself always, keeping and maintaining your integrity throughout. I think there's going to be a lot of situations where you're going to be challenged with decisions of, am I making the right decision by the kid, or am I making the right decision for myself? And so making sure that we keep whoever we're working with at the forefront will lead you and take you so much further than trying to take shortcuts.
I really like that, and always doing right by the kid, and always focusing on their development and putting their development first is incredibly important. So, summarizing that, obviously being adaptable and flexible, and then being a connector has been a key part of your success, and definitely I can say the same for my own. My high school coaching job, I got because I interviewed the guy on the podcast, and he obviously liked how I interviewed him. He's like, I want him to coach my JV boys. So
The
definitely
podcast is
can.
like a cheat code.
It's such a cheat code. It really is. It's a grind, right? As you're experiencing, it's a grind, but definitely worth it. Obviously, I really enjoy just having conversations. It's a lot of fun. So, talking about it, I think you mentioned like at the beginning why you wanted to become a coach, right? You wanted to enjoy what you're doing every day you wake up, right? And so I think sometimes that people can go and look and be like, you're coaching, you're living the dream, right? And we are. However, there are challenges that come with every position you take in life. What are some of the challenges that you experience as a player development coach?
I think the biggest challenge is that I don't meet the eye test.
Hmm.
And I would say that for me, that's been a challenge and just a reoccurring theme in my life, even as a player. I think in the industry, I look really young, right? I'm small, and I'm also a woman. And so I think having those three components is something that at times that I struggle with. I talked about this a little bit on my podcast of when I first started finding my identity, figuring out who I was in the industry and how I could stand out and make a name for myself and really help people grow. And so I think for me over time, I realized like I didn't have to try to change who I was to build my business. Now, may it take a little bit longer? Sure. But I think that's just part of my journey and part of my growth as a coach. And I actually think that helps me connect to my players more because I've been through the struggles, right? I've been doubted, not just as a player, but now as a coach as well. And so being able to still show up every day, still remain disciplined in the things that I do, being confident in who I am and what I bring to the table, I think those skills are very relatable for players and things that I think that I have some experience with that I can help my players with, as well as other coaches, that I work with too.
Absolutely. And I feel like it also gives you that opportunity to go above and beyond. You have to, because you don't pass the eye test, you have to then be even more prepared than the person on the left to the right, which gives you an edge when you're working with athletes because they're like, oh, wow, you know, Coach Shawn is like, I'm improving way more with her than with, who I used to train with. And then that's what this business really is all about. Actually, in last week's podcast, I shared a similar thing is like word of mouth is always going to be your number one way of, growing your business or growing your network. If you can get, teams or players results, people will want to work with you. And so kind of talking about that, I'd love to kind of shift the conversation to about the kids and about just American basketball in general, because this is something that I'm really passionate about. I'm not a huge, I'm in the AAU world, more so because of necessity, and that's where the demand is in this business space. But I want to change it. So, from your perspective, from a player development coach, someone who's worked with athletes from youth all the way up to professional, how? I mean, and this is a big conversation. So we'll just start at what is the first thing you would do to tackle to change the current American basketball youth or current American youth basketball world?
I think, yeah, this is such a huge debate and such like a loaded question.
Right, right.
I'm like, which angle should I attack this from?
Just start with
Um,
one angle and we'll roll
yeah,
from
we'll
there.
grow from there. I think the biggest thing is what's missing in player development is a lot of times player development is surrounded solely by what you can do with the ball versus how to actually play the game. And so if you're not a huge person that believes in small-sided games or different, constraint-led approaches, having your training implement some off-ball stuff, I think is huge. Right? So like, yeah, we can work on one dribble pull-ups, we can work on, separation moves, but let's work on it off of a dribble handoff. Right? So we're now working on how do we set the player up going into the dribble handoff, right? And then maybe we get some on air reps, but then we grow and build that sort of drill. And maybe, we've given them 3 or 4 reads and now they're playing off of those reads, right? So they can use one of those reads. I think that would be some place that I would start if, again, you're not just a person that believes in the small-sided games approach and you're just, you want to focus much more on the skill stuff. For me, I think that would be a great start. And I think overall, when we think about development and we think about how long the ball is in our hands in a game situation, if we're talking about this general rule of thumb of 0.5, right, we're making decisions in 0.5 seconds, then you don't really have time to catch the ball, put it on the floor, go tween into some sort of hezzy pool, right? Like if you have to make a decision in 0.5, that means your decisions are shoot, drive, pass. Like those are our options. And so for me, when I train, those are the things that I have my players focus on because I think that's what's going to make them more successful in games. I think one of the lowest ways to actually obtain skill or for skill acquisition is to actually do specific reps. So like what I mean by that, if I wanted to do mid-range pull-ups, and I'm not saying there's no value in this, but at the youth level, like if I just said, all right, we're going to do tween, and we're going to dribble, and then we're going to use a heavy step, and then we're going to take one more dribble into a corner pull-up, right? And then I have you rep that 5 times. That's probably the lowest form of skill acquisition than we could actually have. And it's the most minimal amount of variation in our reps. So like for instance, for me, variation is huge, or variability, some people call it, right? So if we are going to do mid-range pull-ups, I'm probably not going to have somebody do 20 mid-range pull-ups the same way because you would never do it the same way in games. So we would add, all right, so mid-range pull-up, that would be our first one into, 1-2 pull-up or 1-2 footwork. And then I would have them do a mid-range pull-up into a punch stop, and then a mid-range pull-up into a pullback, mid-range pull-up into where you're just building on these different skills. So now if we're doing 10 reps, we've gotten 2 reps of this, 2 reps of that, 2 reps of this, which is way different than just, hey, we're going to do 10 dribble pull-ups. Again, time and place for everything, but in general, for me, for the youth, I want them to be able to apply more quickly, and I've found that that is one of the most effective ways to do that.
1,000%. And that, like, basketball is such a fluid game, right? Like, I always ask the players, I'm like, how many times does the same exact play get repeated in a game? Maybe 2, and it's probably a fast break, wide open layup, right? Like, even some of your angles, if you're running like whatever a flex offense and you know exactly where your guys are going to be, like, that pass is going to come from different spots. It's not going to be perfect every time. So you talked about variability in your basically how to become like a successful coach or trainer. You talked about adaptability is the first thing you talked about. So for me, like, that was one of the biggest things that I wanted to focus on, is building more adaptable athletes. And you talked about skill acquisition, and the science behind it. So for those that are just hearing that word for the first time, what is skill acquisition science, and how do you apply it into your training? Or can you expand more on how you apply it?
Yeah. Don't quote me on this because I'm not Merriam-Webster, so I don't know it specifically. But to me, like, how I would define skill acquisition is our ability to actually obtain a skill and apply. So not
Mm-hmm.
just being able to do it on air, like, that's the first step of it, but then to be able to take that skill that you've learned and now being able to apply it in a game situation, that to me is like true skill acquisition. And you can, we all are acquiring skills all the
Right.
time, in the classroom, or when you're thinking of, random things, when you're setting something up, right? You get that long manual of step 1, step 2, step 3, right? Now there's some people that go step by step through the manual. For me, like, I probably wouldn't do that. I would probably just, all right, I'm going to put all the pieces out first, right? I'm going to try to figure out which piece goes where and match it with the picture. And I'm acquiring those skills though as I'm going, because I'm actually applying what I'm learning to an actual situation. So that would be the best way that I could describe it.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I am in the same boat. Like, I'm not super sciencey. That's not my brain, but I'm like, once I started reading about it, just like the game, I started looking at the game so much more with, like, so much more fluid. So much more like, oh, it's not always black and white. There's a lot of gray in basketball. So
Totally.
preparing our athletes to be, again, adaptable. And with that being said, like, when we play a lot of games here in America, so this will be the next part of our conversation. What are your kind of thoughts and feelings on, like, and everyone has a different ratio, and there probably isn't a perfect ratio because it's going to be different for each player based on how much each player plays in it said game, how much each player has the ball in their hand in said game. Obviously, AAU, the kids are playing 8 to 10 games a month. Some are playing even more. Some are playing every weekend. What do you feel like should shift within kind of the AAU culture between, like, just training practice versus, like, the games, the test?
Yeah, well, I think that there should be way less games for starters. I think
Yeah.
70% of the time, if not 80% of the time, you should be focused on development, because you can only play a game with the current skill level you actually have. So people think that you're going to go to a
Mm,
game and get better, which in some aspects is true in the sense of experience, right? It is good to have those moments of experience where you're in a game and, let's say that you drive and you're making the read to the opposite corner because that person, the low man stepped in and stopped your drive, right? So like there is good experience within that. But if you don't have the skill to actually pass the ball there, it really doesn't matter that you made the drive and you made that play. And so for me, when we think about development, it isn't just solely, on court, we're working on specific skill stuff. You can also, like, if you're in a good program, to me, that coach or that program director is implementing games within your practices. So what I mean by that, like some things that I used to do when I was a head coach is controlled scrimmages, right? So if I wanted to work on something specific, I would, maybe it's press. So we'll play a full game, maybe we'll play it, against somebody or whatever, or against JV, or, however we did it at the time. And the first quarter was press, right? The second quarter is zone. Or maybe we're just playing in half court. We want to work on just our sets. So we're playing one full quarter, just working on our sets. So we'll get into different sets. Through the sets, we'll get into different reads off the sets. Things of that nature. So practicing and playing against different things strategically, stopping it, right? Being able for a coach to be able to stop and, ask the players questions. So why did you do that? What did you think about that? What was your thought process behind why you cut at that period of time? What was your cue that happened? Having conversations, stopping it, breaking down, teaching. All right, so if we're guarding the pick and roll and we're hedging, do we want our body position to be sending them away from the screen, or do we want it to be to the screen? Well, the reason they're not using the screen is because our body position is faced the wrong way, which we're not prepared for that backside coverage as well. So there are so many opportunities to teach for kids to play in a much more controlled setting than just going up and down, right? And a lot of times at the youth level, it comes down to who's bigger and who's more athletic, right? Like that's generally like, and for coaches, right, that's who you're picking as kids to be on your program. Who's the tallest, who's the strongest, who's the fastest. And like I understand that model, I just don't necessarily agree with it in the sense of I think there's way too many games, and I don't think that the kids are walking away with the information that they need to be better. And if they were, then I would say let's play more games. But frankly, right now, that's just not the reality. And so I always say heavy focus on development, sprinkle in some games here or there, because obviously that's what kids want to do. They want to have fun, and you want to keep it fun for them too. But there's a lot of opportunities if you're with a good team, if you're with a good program, where you can play, get better, get experience and reps playing, where you don't have to go to a tournament to do that.
1,000%. And I always caveat this with I am in the AAU industry. And so, but I will say the kids that get the best are the kids that stay with us when we run our off-season programming, and they're training 2 to 3 times a week, and they're playing less games. The ball is in their hand more. They're making more decisions in an hour, whatever that decision is, right? Like you're talking about pick and roll, on ball, different variations of finishes, contested shooting. They may get up 3 shots in a game, right? Versus a training session where you're doing small-sided shooting games, you can get up however many, 50, 100. And so it's just like, it makes sense. And I understand kids want to play. And so that's like part of the reason I got into the industry is to change the industry from the inside out. Like my goal is like especially for middle school is eventually to get to like just like league play. Like we're playing in leagues, right? We get 1 or 2 games a weekend, but we're practicing training 3 times a week, games 1 or 2 times a week, so we can start to balance that out. Because as you talk about, like it's just missing. And it's just like when I watch a lot of people play in AAU, like they don't know what to do, like you said, off the basketball.
Totally. And you do a great job running your program because you don't just do the on court stuff. You also do the film stuff and you also do the
Yeah.
strength and conditioning component. So you're building, well-rounded athletes in general. And I know some things like we've talked about before of just some of the standards that you have for your program. And I think that in general helps kids, tremendously. But to your point, in a practice, in a team practice, for the most part, um, you're not really getting up enough shots.
No,
On
no.
average, you're getting 50 shots in a practice, which is why your development outside of that is so important. Because within an hour, if I work with somebody, we can get hundreds of shots in a minute, in an hour. You know what I mean? So, yeah, it all kind of depends on your situation, but I think to your point, running a program in a way that's valuing the development portion, as well as obviously keeping it fun for the kids, I think
Right.
is the sweet spot.
Yeah, and of course there's an art to it, and I think one of the things is we want to focus on right, like you're talking about that long term development. And so when we're focusing on that, like a lot of times, like we're in the society that we want everything now, we want results now, we want to win games now. We want to post that we were 4-0 this weekend with our team. We want to do it now, right? We want to be right a 5-star recruit now. And it takes so much more time than we think. So how do you help preach patience to your athletes?
That's a tough one. Um, it's easier when the player is older to teach,
Right.
patience. Um, but I think it's a really important aspect for kids to understand because obviously we both were kids at one point. When you want to be good at something, you want to be good at it now. And I think you can see a lot of times when kids struggle with something, they kind of steer away from it because it feels hard and challenging, but that's exactly the moment that you need to lean into it more. And so that's kind of the way in which I try to reframe it and approach it with my players is like in those moments of frustration and in the moments of wanting to know everything or wanting to have all the skill, you're actually missing out on the opportunity to grow. And just that small reframe I think is really helpful. And I think the other part as a coach is like you have to understand that every player is different, right? So some clients that I have, they respond to failure like they shut down.
Hmm.
Other clients respond with anger. Some clients that motivates them. You kind of have to know who your client is and based upon that, give them that food that feeds their soul. And I think I tried my best to do that, but I think small reframes and shifts in our perspective of things I think is really important.
Right. And it's about teaching them, right? And like we can't. I think sometimes even for me as a coach, I'm like, I want my kids to know that they should have patience now, and that's also part of our job as a coach. We are a mentor. We're helping teach them about like life skills. Like we can share, like you were talking about at the beginning. Part of your superpowers is that ability of relatability, right? And being like, hey, look, you're gonna have failures. People are going to doubt you, and this is how I navigated it, and then creating like a learning environment. And so that was going to be the other thing I was going to talk about or ask you about is, like it's great when kids come to train with you and come to BTG practice. However, both of us know that if that player is actually serious about getting better, they have to work on their game by themselves. How do you inspire learning for your athletes and development outside of when they're working with you?
Yeah, so I have like a platform and I on this platform will share workouts, will share film, and we'll put even just like clips of things that we worked on in session that maybe we talked about or that I want them to improve on. And so they can go on there. They have anybody that trains with me can go on there and be able to see what sort of workouts that I have for them outside of just working with me, right? Because let's say you work with me 2 times a week or 3 times a week, right? You're talking about 2 to 3 hours a week that you're putting in work. You can't expect that in 2 to 3 hours every week that you're going to greatly improve this skill without doing anything on your own. And so I really try to emphasize that to my players. I try to make sure that they're prepared by having these workouts, by having film that they can watch, by them having the ability to rewatch themselves and learn from that. I think all of those things help.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're giving them that platform, those tools, those essential basically skills and essential things that are outside of just being on court. Because I find that I have one player in mind who has made it. It's me, this other player as well. He just tore his ACL, unfortunately. So I don't think he was about to have a big spring. Again, obviously, his challenges with injury, and maybe I'll even follow up with that. But my player who I feel like has gotten the best with me since he's been with me since I started, he is a film junkie. Like after each game, his mom records the videos, and he will be after we do our talk. He's literally on his phone studying, right? So that film study is so important. So can you talk about how you break down film and how you teach film to athletes, maybe on the younger side, and then how you kind of, scale it based on the IQ of what each player has?
Yeah, so I think it's different at every level, and I think it's dependent on the player. I'll start with like the youth level. For me, when I watch film, I don't want to just nitpick every negative thing that they did.
Hmm.
Because I think when you do that, then film becomes something that players don't want to watch.
Right.
So I try to give 2 to 3 really positive clips to the one clip that I need to them to really learn from, right? So if one of the things, I'll do, like, I have a development tracker with my players, and I don't measure um points and steals and stuff like that. What I measure is, let's say for instance we're talking about defense, right? So how many deflections did you get? How many times did you pick up the ball full court? How many times did you get your box out? How many times were you in the right position and help? Right? Like, so we have different measurable goals, and goals that don't necessarily always show up on the stat sheet. And so if they do those things, right, like I'm highlighting that, right? Or I'm highlighting the play where they ran over to help their teammate up, or they were on the bench and they were cheering for their teammate that got an and one, right? I'm going to sprinkle some of those clips in there because I think that part is really important. But then you also have to, sprinkle a clip in here and there of the things that you really want them to improve on. Like, hey, they got a second opportunity, they scored here, and look who didn't get their box out, right? So, like, yeah, that may not have been your specific assigned player, but that was a player in your area. That player got the rebound. That's your fault. So kind of talking it through with them. Now, like at the, if it was my college players, we're more specifically looking at, how they're playing within their role. And this can be both skill based, right? So, hey, I thought, here, if you would have made a little bit more contact on the step back, I actually think that you would have gotten the separation that you needed to get that shot off, right? So you can look at it from a skill perspective, but you can also look at it from a team perspective. If they're running zoom action and they're the person that should be, they're the person that starts in the corner and, probably is going to receive the handoff. Well, if we go through and I'm like, hey, here's an opportunity for you to, twirl around that initial pin down and cut to the basket, that's a scoring opportunity for you. Right, so it all depends on the level. And then when I worked for the Lakers, a lot of guys wanted specific individual things. So, like, one of the things that I did for Kuz was he wanted to see all of his help side rotations. because at the time he was, late a lot or not in the right spot when he was off the ball. So, he was like, clip all my help side rotation stuff. So I would literally clip all the clips just with him off the ball guarding. And, we would talk about it, and so you start to see that film isn't just about, all right, let me get my highlights in so I can post that on Instagram, right? There's so many other ways to watch film. There's so many ways to improve your game. And those are just some of the strategies and um, tactics that I use. And film is something you watch all the time. So even if I'm not with a player personally, I'm sending them film, right? Hey, these are some things that I noticed. These are some things that I see. And, for my older players, we'll collaborate more on certain things that they want as well versus just at the youth level where I'm kind of curating those clips for them. But I will say at the youth level, the biggest thing is do not watch the full game. Kids do not have the patience to sit through and watch a full game. Now, if you want to watch a quarter and you want to talk about how well they played that quarter, how poorly they played that quarter, that's one thing. But like, it should be no longer than 15 minutes because kids are just not engaged long enough for them to actually receive the information you want to share with them.
Right. Make it short and sweet. And I like what you were talking about. What gets measured gets results, right? Which is similar to obviously your company reps or results. And then what gets celebrated gets repeated. So really focusing on tracking the things that you want to see, behaviors that you see repeated. So with my last question for our podcast today, I'm curious, like you mentioned, like working with Kuzma, right? And on his help side rotations, watching the film with him, and then, what you do with your youth athletes, making sure it's only 15 minutes. Now, you've worked with a range of athletes, boys and girls. What is the difference, if any, of coaching different levels?
Coaching or training?
We'll go. I want to say both. Both.
So I'll first tackle the training side. I think one of the biggest things is, as a pro, we're not really oftentimes working on a bunch of new skills. We are refining the 1 to 3 things that you already do really well. Um, at the professional level, people are getting contracts because they're a specialist in something, right? They're a really good shooter, they're a really good passer, maybe they're a great defender. Whatever it is, there's a specific reason why a team is interested or signs a certain player. And so one of the stories that I tell people all the time is, I used to help out with the draft workouts when I worked for the Lakers. And the head coach at the time was Luke Walton. And the one thing that he would say before we started the workout was, I don't want to see what you've been working on with your trainer for the last 2 months after season ended, right? I want to see what you already do well because that's why you're here. And so when you're talking about in a training sort of aspect, for me, that means that my off seasons, I'm maybe focusing on one thing, right? 2 things that I really want to improve on, but I'm really refining and maintaining the skills that I already have. So for youth, I may have you do 10 reps of something or 7 reps of something. Whereas for a pro, like, I'm trying to keep it as precise as possible. So if you don't have this down in 3 reps, it's probably not something that you're going to be doing. Or if it's one of my clients, like, we had to weigh the pros and cons of, are you ever going to shoot a left-hand floater? Right? And at that point, like, if you're not, and you haven't had success with it in season for the last couple years, then like every floater is going to be right-handed, right? So like there's certain things that you kind of work with your clients on, depending on just like what makes the most sense. I think the youth level is much more about teaching skill, teaching them how to play the game. We already have the assumption that at that level, you should already know how to play the game, right? I should be able to ask a professional player, if you're coming off of a high pick and roll, what are my 5 reads? right? And they should know that without us having to go through it in a drill sort of sense. Now, we may go through the execution of making that one hand pass to the opposite side corner, right? We may work on that, but I don't need to work on that whole sequence of coming off the screen, right? Feeling where the defender is, attacking the big, making that one hand. Like, we don't need to do that at that level. So I think that's probably the biggest difference as far as training. The youth level, like, you need to explain everything. It's like you're teaching somebody something for the first time. You can't just say, hey, we're going to go tween, take one dribble, punch, change directions, and then we're going to make that one-handed pass to the, opposite side corner because that help stepped over. They have no clue what you're talking about. They'll look at you and act like they do, but for the most part, you need to explain things, and you need to explain them in detail, right? Angles, body positioning, things of that nature. And you want to let them get a lot of reps. You want to let them make some mistakes without you saying anything and let them figure it out. And I think that's the biggest difference. You can be on court for a little bit longer as well when you're with a youth player. I'll go an hour and a half with some of our workouts. Well, with my pro guys, it's like once that 55-minute hits, like you can tell it's like, all right, I'm finishing up here, and I think, that's probably the biggest difference. The other things that I can think of are time of year, so we're way more cognizant of time of year when it's with a professional player. So if, I have a player that's coming back right now and he's going to start, in August, we're probably not going to be doing any live stuff for the first 3 weeks. Right? Like, let their body recover, let them just get, feel the ball, shoot a little bit, work on some touches. But maybe towards the last 3 weeks of the summer, we're super ramped up, right? So, maybe I'll bring in some of my players and we'll go just mock up and down to 4 or 5, right? Or we'll play out of a DHO action to some extent. Things of that nature. Whereas youth, it's like you can train them year round with a development approach and a development mindset, because we're not focused on earning a contract. We're not focused on not being injured, things of that nature. So I think that would be as more so on the training side. On the coaching side, I think you really at the youth level have to tell them what to do. And so what I mean by that is if I'm coaching, and this really goes even to high school, sprint, get in the corner, right? Get back on defense. You're talking about these things, right? Whereas at the professional level, you're talking more of the in-depth coverages, right? So if you were on the sideline and they were playing defense, hey, ice, right? Force him this way, you're talking, get up. You're talking about specific nuances within certain things, certain skills, certain game plans that are much more in depth than you would at the youth level.
Got it. Yeah. So definitely at the end of the day, it's scaling to where they're at. And I think really importantly, especially because this podcast generally focuses on the youth, I think it's cool to get the insight on how that differs from professional athletes and how important it is just to focus on teaching the game to kids and really helping them just understand, right? Instead of just teaching them super specific and putting them in a box. So I really appreciate all the wisdom you left with us today. I got a page of notes for myself. And with that being said, where can people find your podcast? Where can people connect with you? I know you're active on YouTube and Instagram. And what's the best way to get in contact in case a parent is listening and they want their athletes to train with you?
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you for having me on. I really enjoyed our conversation, and it felt good to actually not be the person asking the questions.
Yeah, I'm sure it's more fun, huh?
All the pressure's on you right now, so this is good for me. But yeah, if you are interested in learning more about my company, you can go literally to repstoresultsbasketball.com. I also have social media if you're interested in talking to me personally. It's Shawn Kolani, so ShawnKolani. I'm on LinkedIn under that. I'm on TikTok under that, Instagram as well, and then my YouTube is Reps to Results Basketball, and you can find me on any of those platforms. And yeah.
All right. Thanks for sharing those. Everyone, make sure you go follow Shawn on your favorite platforms and go give her podcast a listen. All
Oh
right.
yeah,
Thanks,
let
everyone.
me mention. Wait, let me mention that
Yes.
podcast.
Yes.
Forgot about that. I knew I was missing something. Podcast. Timeout with SCO. Literally the word timeout with and SCO. We're on social media. Again, you can find that on YouTube as well. And yeah, I was like, I'm missing something, but I left it on a cliffhanger instead of just taking a second.
There we go. Hey, we got it all now. So make sure, listen to the podcast, go follow. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Shawn.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Beyond the Scoreboard podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure that you subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and share it with a friend, coach, or parent you feel like would get value from this episode. It's our responsibility to impact as many parents and coaches who are the ones that are impacting our athletes. That's how we create a ripple effect. So thank you for being a part of our community, and we look forward to serving you all next week.